Jemele, thank you for hanging with us today.
Thanks for having me. When you read that bio, that just reminded me, like, damn, I got a lot of jobs.
Listen, I
She,
said,
Really.
wow,
she definitely.
a rap sheet of sorts. Yes, Jamel, thank you so much for being here. We're so excited. So, Brittany mentioned the memoir, child. You came through swinging. You came through swinging with the memoir. We were like, ugh, I didn't expect anything less from you. But you shared in general, black women hate being described as angry. If we're not in the mood to be accommodating, if we want room to be unapologetic and stand on our principles, then people view that as anger. Instead, we're really just exercising our right to avoid nonsense. That hit me like a ton of bricks. I
Same.
said, I feel seen.
Yes.
I feel seen.
Yes.
I feel seen. Jamil, at one point or what point in your upbringing can you reflect on that really made you feel like you were the most unbothered or unapologetic?
Ooh, well, I do think, and I don't know if it's a part of our superpowers that sometimes we have as Black women. It feels like it increases maybe every 10 years. Like, in your
Mm,
20s, you're unbothered, right? But in a way that is largely not productive, right?
Right.
A lot of times,
Yes.
I'm not speaking for all 20-year-olds. I'm just saying, me personally, and then you get in your 30s, and then it starts to refine a little bit, where you
mm,
find kind of that inner grown woman that is starting to emerge out of the some of the silliness of your 20s. Then when you get to your 40s, where I am personally sitting now, you really don't give a fuck then. And
Mm.
I think it's because after all the lived experience, the ups, the downs, the tribulations, you realize that the best thing you can do for yourself is to set boundaries, to realize no is a complete sentence, to really cut off maybe a lot of the things that were causing you to be bothered. Be it the outside influences of people, be it people in your inner circle. I understand now why people say as you get older, you have a smaller circle. I kind of get why that happens now. And so I guess for me, especially in this last decade, having seen my public profile really explode and expand, having to deal with a lot of nonsense, that it really just tightened my resolve, if you will. I think the tools that I had were always there. They just got more refined as I grew, as I lived, and as I experienced.
I love that. I love that you said in your 30s, it's going to come every 10 years because that's where I am right now. And I'm like, let me get in my unapologetic, unbothered bag.
Yeah.
I'm overdue. I'm overdue. I'm
Yes.
overdue.
It gives you something to look forward to. But Jamel, you mentioned setting boundaries, and we hear about boundaries. We talk about boundaries all the time. But I find it the most difficult when we have to set boundaries to those that are closest to us, like our friends and our family. And a lot of the times when we start enforcing those, we're considered mean or difficult. So, how do you navigate those conversations with the people that are closest to you when it's time to lay down the law?
That is, I'm so glad you said that, because that is, I think, the most challenging part about a certain phase of your adulthood is being able to set boundaries with those closest to you. Like, it's easy to set boundaries with somebody on the street who doesn't know you, or somebody that's just in and out of your life for a season.
Yeah.
But it's much harder to do that with your parents, with your friends. That is a lot harder. And I have to, to be fully transparent, I'm not really perfect at that. And I noticed, not necessarily with my friends, because I think they were always kind of self-aware enough to understand where, if any, boundaries needed to be set. But with my mother or something like that, that was not as difficult, because as you said, that was more difficult. But as you set more boundaries with, say, your mother, the more it actually kind of annoys them, because
Mm.
this just in, mothers don't do good with boundaries,
They don't.
because they
They don't.
don't,
Girl, call
especially
my mama and tell her that. Yeah,
especially black mamas. Good God, they don't. They're like, boundary. What's that? Like, mm-mm.
man.
I'm not about. They're like, I'm not a boundary. That one, you give one of your little friends a boundary is how they look at
Right.
it. Because they're gonna always pull the mama card on you. But
Mm.
even in that, I had to what I'm much more careful and aware about, and this to lump my friends back in, is becoming people's emotional dumpster. Like, I understand, like, you're supposed to be a listening ear for your friends, for your people, but I think we've all had that friend or had that relative or whoever in our lives, even that man, if you will, that when they're going through a lot of different emotional changes, they're always calling you and sort of sucking your emotional strength. So it feels more not like a give and take. It feels like your energy is being consumed by this person all the time.
Yeah.
And so I had to do a better job of either providing more distance with people like that, or maybe in some cases kind of cutting them. That distance meant cutting them out altogether, or just setting a parameter and not feeling bad. It's kind of like with the with phone calls, right? Like, there are some people who feel like, people who you ain't married to, who feel like every time they call you that you should just be at their kind of beck and call, and have the nerve to try to check you if you aren't available, because just because
Right.
you call me doesn't mean that I'm available. And I don't even mean being busy. Like, I am at a point now that if I'm not in the mood to talk, or if I'm just kind of center myself for a minute, I'm not picking up the phone. And I shouldn't have to explain to you why that is. So I kind of reached a point where I'm just kind of out of explanations. Like, I don't really feel like explaining myself, especially on certain things. So I just say, like, you know what? I just need some time to refocus me. And I don't feel bad about that, where I think I used to feel bad about it, because now I've come to the point and I'm self-aware enough to realize I need those moments of stillness in order for me to be the best friend, the best wife, all of those things, the best daughter that I can be.
Period. Implement some boundaries, child.
Yeah.
So, Jemele, you brought the mamas into it. I wasn't, but you did. So now here we are. We here
Here
talking
we
about the
go.
mamas.
Here we
So
go.
you've been really open and honest, vulnerable, transparent about your mother's earlier struggles with addiction and how it hurt you and affected you as a child. We get questions all the time about how to deal with these complexities of parental relationships that a lot of times we don't really have the answers to. How do you deal with forgiving a person, a mom, a loved one, even when they might necessarily didn't mean to hurt you? What have been your keys or your steps to forgiveness?
So one step that I think was really helpful, and that came out in this memoir too, I believe, or came out of it, I should say, is that with your mother in particular, you need to ask them as many questions as possible. And by that I mean about their life, about what their life looked like before you were in it, about their disappointments, their failures, their hopes, their aspirations. Because when you learn those things, it helps you see your parent as a complete person and not just your parent, and not just my mother whose function is to take care of me. When you understand them as people, it makes it easier to forgive them, because you have friends or other people in your life that you forgive for things, and part of the reason you're able to forgive them is because you understand the context of who they are and how they get themselves in situations, and even how they make bad decisions. And so the more I found myself asking my mother about herself, and this is not just for this book, but even before then, the more I was able to see her. She's my mama, but she's just a person.
Yeah.
She's a person who has unhealed trauma. She's a person who, as you just mentioned, really spent a good part of her adulthood suffering from addiction. And while that doesn't excuse some of the poor decisions that she made, if I understand how you got there, it makes me easier to forgive. Plus, I think helpful in the other part of that is that person too has to be willing to allow themselves to not just be open, but to be accountable. My mother has never always talked to me from a position of accountability, which I think helps. She has never made excuses for her behavior or some of the bad decisions that she has made. And so I think that made it easier for me to forgive her. I still struggle at times when it comes to my father, not necessarily forgiveness, because sometimes, as you all know, you have to forgive people more for yourself than them, because you don't want to be bound to that spirit of being angry. I didn't want to be bound to that, so I forgave him. But there have been times where I have found myself being a little resentful. And the resentment comes from the lack of accountability. And so that part, I notice that when that accountability piece isn't there, it makes it harder for you to meet the person halfway emotionally. So nevertheless, even within the scope of forgiveness, it's still hard to realize your parents are not, superheroes. It's still hard to figure out that way, but I do think it helps you see them more once you realize exactly what their flaws are and, kind of how they think about the world.